Thank you very much for being here. Let's start with this question. As urban India changed dramatically over the last 3 decades, was there any change in the woman on Indian television, if at all? Know who that is? If you were in India between 2000 and 2008, and you were above television watching age, whatever that might be these days, there's no way you wouldn't have known who that is. That's Parvati, one of the famous bahus or daughters-in-law of Indian television, starring on the show called Kahani Ghar Ghar Ki, which became incredibly popular in India at that time. It seemed as if everyone was watching these shows. Whether you were young, you were old, whether you were rich, you were poor, whether you were a woman or a man, you were watching these shows, even if the men claimed that they were forced to sit down beside their wives and daughters and sisters and therefore watch those shows. But these shows were not as popular with critics and commentators and scholars as it was with the audience. Their main complaint: these shows are regressive. They just enforce the age-old traditional gender stereotypes and the traditional relationships between men and women. Interestingly though, by 2007 or 2008, as these shows kind of came to a close, there was a change in this critical appreciation. Scholars started to say that there is actually evidence that these shows make women feel empowered. And because these shows feature real issues and strong women, they are actually a blow against patriarchy rather than being the kinds of shows that reinforce the patriarchal norms. So who's right? The scholars who wrote about these shows earlier, the commentators who decried these shows earlier, or the scholars and the commentators who actually praised these shows later on as these shows were dying away? Let's do something. Let's take a look at the title track of this show, assuming that this is the first thing that you're seeing when you're sitting down and you don't really know that this show is coming up. What are the lyrics of this title track? It says, "Rishto ki puja jaha ho, adar badho ka waha ho," where relationships are worshipped, elders are respected, bhige jo mamta ka aachal, aasu bane gangajal, when these elders have affection for the younger generation, tears become holy water. Hasna hasana hai, rona rulana hai, there is laughter and there are tears, both received and given. Khona hai, pana hai, fir muskurana hai, there is loss, there is gain, and there are smiles again. And that is the story, they say, of each home, and that is the story of every home. And when you're hearing these words, what do you see in front of you? The images that you see convey to you certain things. They convey to you that this is unarguably a Hindu family, and a pious Hindu family at that, because this title track, this ditty, starts and ends with shots of Hindu deities. It tells you it's an extended family. There are lots of members in it, and everything seems to be happening within the 4 walls of this admittedly palatial home. And it also tells you that the bahu, the daughter-in-law, is central. And of course, by the way, it cautions you, well, maybe caution's not the right word, but it tells you that there are going to be tears in this show, because they say Rona, Rulana again and again. So you know what's coming. And at the heart of the characters is a sense of tradition, a sense of duty, a sense of devotion to each other in the family. Is that necessarily a bad thing? Were these shows criticized just because they were showing the traditional family? Let's again do a bit of time traveling. Let's go back to 1984. Before economic liberalization, before the television explosion, when there was just one channel to watch a show, and the show that you watched at this time was this, Ye Jo Hai Zindagi. In terms of some of the flavor of the title track, it's not very different from what was being said earlier. However, there's a difference, because this title track says it doesn't matter what life is like, because life might sometimes be sour, it might sometimes be sweet, it might sometimes be spicy, occasionally it'll be bland. But the best way to handle life is through laughter and through fun. And that's what is kind of connoted on these visuals as well. Most importantly, when you look at these visuals and you look at the woman, you will unarguably, and of course this is a superficial reading that you're doing, right? Because you're just sitting there and you haven't seen anything else. This is the first title track that you're seeing for the first time. it will connote to you that this woman is unarguably modern. If in nothing else, then certainly by the fact that she wears the dresses that she's wearing. She's wearing what are Western clothes, which were much more of a rarity in 1984 than they are today. And she's shown outside the home, she's shown returning from work, and she's shown having a lot of fun. And horror of horrors, there is no extended family around. There is no mother-in-law, no daughter-in-law, no sisters-in-law, no in-laws in fact, other than her own husband and her brother in what sociologists would call a nuclear or an extended nuclear family. Interestingly though, this is not how it panned out in India sociologically, or at least in urban India, which is where these shows are set. Both of these shows are actually set in urban India. In urban India, in terms of women's participation in the workforce, it increased by a third, by 33% between 1984 and 2000. In terms of the structure of the family, the nuclear family, which is essentially just a couple, maybe their children, that increased relatively by 9% over 1981. Yet, what you saw on screen was kind of a reversal. So very interestingly, as women went more and more outside into the world, on television, you saw that women were coming back more into the four or within the four walls of the home. And that leads to an even more interesting question. Why did this happen? Unfortunately though, we don't have the time to go through that. If you want to discuss more about that, I'll be happy to engage in a conversation with you. Just write to me and I'll tell you more about the tale of two ditties. Thank you very much.